He brings his voice down, but it makes his words seem even more forceful. Julie's uncle had the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck, twice. One minute he was a perfect little baby, just like your son, Bryce. And the next he was irreversibly damaged. My mother was suddenly hysterical. In seconds she was bawling her eyes out, wailing. And my father was all over her, trying to calm her down. It was no use. She basically deserved right there on the spot. Lunetta threw her napkin down and muttered, "This family is a joke," and took off. Then my mother bolted out of the room, sobbing into her hands, and my father raced after her, throwing my grandfather a wickedest look I'd ever seen. That left Granddad and me, and a table full of cold food. "Wow," I finally said. "I had no idea." "You still don't," he told me. "What do you mean?" He sat there like granite for a minute, then leaned across the table toward me and said, why do you suppose that upset your mother so much?" I don't know." I gave her a half-hearted grin and said, "Because she's female?" He smiled, but just barely. "No, she's upset because she knows that she could very well be standing in Mr. Baker's shoes right now." I thought about it a minute and finally asked, "Did her brother have the cord around his neck when he was born?" He shook his head. "Well then," he leaned forward even farther and whispered, "You did." "I did?" He nodded twice. "But the doctor who delivered you was on the ball. Plus, apparently there was some slag in the cord, so he was able to loop it off as you came out. You didn't hang yourself coming into the world, but it could very easily have gone the other way. If I'd been told years or even weeks ago that I'd come down the chute noosed and ready to hang, I'd have made some kind of joke about it, or more likely I'd have said, "Yeah, that's nice. Now can you spare me the discussion?" But after everything that had happened, I was really freaking out, and I couldn't escape the questions tidal waving my brain. Where would I be if things had been different? What would they have done with me? From the way my dad was talking, he wouldn't have had much use for me, that's for sure. He'd had stuck me in a nut house somewhere, anywhere, and forgotten about me. But then I thought, no, I'm his kid. He wouldn't do that, would he? I looked around at everything we had, the big house, the white carpet, the antiques and artwork and stuff that was everywhere. Would I have given up all the stuff to make my life more pleasant? I adopted it. And man, I adopted it big time. I'd have been an embarrassment, something to try to forget about. How things looked had always been a biggie to my parents, especially to my dad. Very quietly, my granddad said, "You can't dwell on what might have been, Bryce." Then, like he could read my mind, he added, "And it's not fair to condemn him for something he hasn't done." I nodded and tried to get a grip, but I wasn't doing a very good job of it. Then he said, "By the way, I appreciated your comment before." "What?" I asked, but my throat was feeling all pinched and swollen. "About your grandmother. How did you know that?" I shook my head and said, "Julie told me." "Oh, you spoke with her, then?" "Yeah, actually, I apologized to her." "Well," and I was feeling a lot better about everything. But now, God, I feel like such a jerk again. "Don't. You apologized. And that's what matters." He stood up and said, "Say, I'm in the mood for a walk. Wanna join me?" Go for a walk? What I wanted to do was go to my room, lock the door, and be left alone. "I find it really helps to clear the mind," he said, and that's when I realized that this wasn't just a walk. This was an invitation to do something together. I stood up and said, "Yeah, let's get out of here." For a guy who'd only basically even said pass the sword to me, my granddad turned out to be a real talker. We walked our neighborhood and the next neighborhood and the next neighborhood, and not only did I find out that my granddad knows a lot of stuff, I found out that the guy is funny in a in a saddle kind of dry way. It's the stuff he says, plus the way he says it. It's really, I don't know, cool. As we were winding back into our own territory, we passed by the house that's going up where the sycamore tree used to be. My granddad stopped, looked up into the night, and said, "It must have been a spectacular view." I looked up too, and noticed for the first time that night that you could see the stars. "Did you ever see her up there?" I asked them. "Your mother pointed her out to me one time as we drove by. It scared me to see her up so high, but after I read the article, I understood why she did it." He shook his head. "The tree's gone, but she's still got the spark it gave her. Know what I mean?" Luckily, I didn't have to answer. He just grinned and said, "Some of us get dipped in flat, some in satin, some in glows." He turned to me. "But every once in a while, you find someone who's iridescent, and when you do, nothing will ever compare." As we walked up to our front porch, my grandfather put his arm around my shoulder and said, "It was nice walking with you, Bryce. I enjoyed myself very much." "Me too," I told him, and we went inside. Right away, we knew we'd stepped into a war zone, and even though no one was yelling or crying, from the look on my parents' faces, I could tell there'd been a major meltdown while my granddad and I were out. Granddad whispered to me, "I've got another fence to mend, I'm afraid," and headed into the dining room to talk to my parents. I wanted nothing to do with that vibe. I went straight to my room, closed the door, and flopped through the darkness onto my bed. I lay there a while and let the dinner disaster play through my mind. And when I totally burned the fuse thinking about it, I sat up and looked out the window. There was a light on somewhere inside the baker's house, and the street lights were glowing. But the night still seemed really dense, like it was darker than usual and, I don't know, heavy. I leaned closer to the window and looked up into the sky, but I couldn't see the stars anymore. I wondered if Julie had ever been in a sycamore at night. I wondered if Julie had ever been in a sycamore at night, among the stars. I shook my head, flat, glossy, iridescent. What was up with that? Julie Baker had always seemed just plain dusty to me. I snapped on my desk lamp and dug the newspaper with the article about Julie out of the drawer where I tossed it. Just like I thought. They made it sound like Julie was trying to save Mount Rushmore or something. They called her a strong voice in an urban wilderness and a radiant beacon, shedding light on the need to curtail continued overdevelopment of our once quaint and tranquil community. Spare me, I mean, what's wrong with letting a guy cut down a tree on his own property so he can build a house? His lot, his tree, his decision. End of story. The piece in the paper was gag me gosh. Except for the places where they quoted Julie. Maybe it was just in contrast to the reporter's slant or something. But Julie's parts didn't come off, "Oh, woe is me," like I was expecting. They were, I don't know, deep. Sitting in that tree was seriously philosophical to her. And the odd thing is, it all made sense to me. She talked about what it felt like to be up in that tree, and how it transcended this dimensional space. To be held above the earth and brushed by the wind, she said. It's like your heart has been kissed by beauty. Who in junior high do you know that would put together a sentence like that? None of my friends, that's for sure. There was other stuff too, like how something can be so much more than the parts it took to make it, and why people need things around them that lift them above their lives and make them feel the miracle of living. I wound up reading and rereading her parts, wondering when in the world she started thinking like that. I mean, no kidding. Julie Baker's smart, but this was something way beyond straight A's. A month ago, if I'd read this article, I would have chucked it in the trash as complete garbage. But for some reason, it made sense to me now. A lot of sense. A month ago, I also wouldn't have paid attention to the picture of Julie, but now I found myself staring at it. Not the one of the whole scene. That was more emergency rescue equipment than Julie. The other one, on the bottom half of the page. Someone must have used a killer telephoto lens because you can tell that she's in the tree, but it's mostly from the shoulders up. She's looking off into the distance, and the wind is blowing her hair back like she's at the helm of the ship or something, sailing into the sun. I'd spent so many years avoiding Julie Baker that I'd never really looked at her, and now all of a sudden I couldn't stop. This weird feeling started taking over the pit of my stomach. The weird feeling started taking over the pit of my stomach, and I didn't like it, not one bit. To tell you the truth, it scared the shit rock out of me. I buried the paper under my pillow and tried to remind myself of what a pain Julie Baker was, but my mind started to wander again. And pretty soon I had that stupid paper out from under my pillow. This was insane. What was I doing? I made myself shut out the light and go to bed. I was sleeping. Man, and it was definitely time to get a grip.